Good morning, and good morning again. Happy Saturday to you. Listen, we're just delighted to be able to come once again to bring you a live broadcast. We're saying thankful this morning, thankful because that's the word of the day. Thankful that the good Lord above woke us up and we're found on the wake up list. I'm telling you right now, anything past that is just a given. I'm just glad to be able to be found on the wake up list. Welcome to our friends on Facebook Live. We want to say welcome to those on our YouTube channel as well. And then maybe there are those who are even dialing in by phone. We want to invite you today to a very, very intense session. We're going to go hard in for 60 minutes, and I don't want to waste any of those seconds. And so I want to get in as quick as I can. I want to tell you first and foremost how you can join this session. Maybe there's somebody else today that you want to be able to get access to this very real-time information. We priding ourselves on practical strategies and resources to help you as a broadcast viewer to manage and move through this new series. You can join us, as we said before, on Facebook Live. You see the handle there, Dr. K.O. Williams Space Ministry. You can also get us on our YouTube channel, Dr. K.O. Williams Ministry. Let me tell you that the YouTube channel is our place of reflection. If you want to hear this session again, or we've been doing this session this is our third week. And so if you want to catch a review of the other therapists as well, let me tell you, all you got to do is go to our YouTube channel and they're chronologized there from the very beginning. As a matter of fact, you can even view other series that we've talked about as well. Looking for love in all the wrong places, navigating through dark waters. Let me just tell you, that's the place to go, is to our YouTube channel. And then I want to invite you, if you have a specific topic that we have not covered yet, and you saying, Dr. Williams, is there any way that you can bring some attention to a particular subject? All you have to do is email us to the link below in your voice, bit.ly/Real Talk Your Voice. I promise you, these series that we have been producing have been the direct results of the inquiries from the viewers. And listen, it's every Saturday for 60 minutes from 9 to 10. We're addressing real life issues. It's straight, honest, transparent conversation. And we always try to pride ourselves in giving you some kind of tools to put in your toolbox. And so that's it for the welcome. I'm just very good. I have one other housekeeping request, and that is I'd like for you to do me a favor and hit that comment button and say good morning. Say something as simple as hello. When you do that, I'll give you a shout out, because what it does is it lets our IT team know that you're on board with us. And then if you have someone you say, man, they really need to be blessed by this, you can hit that share button this morning and it'll send them directly the link to join as well. Let me just get started. Good morning, Mr. Flanagan, all the way from Jacksonville, North Carolina. I'm telling you right now, he's been a mentor of mine ever since I've been in elementary school, and I'm just delighted to have him with us today. He's in the pews. I'm promising right now, we're going to get on your road today because we've got some good information for you. Brother Joe Nance Jr., amen, my God brother, all the way in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. Good morning to you. Sister Terry Marlowe, let me tell you, she's a real supporter. She's been hanging out with us for some time, and we say welcome to you as well. And Sister Satra Symes, all the way up in the Raleigh, Durham area, thank you as well. Sister Giselle Ashford, all the way from Jacksonville, North Carolina. We're Sister Dr. Carol Montague Davis. Good morning to you as well. We're asking you to continue to give us that shout out. Listen, I'm about 1.5 minutes from turning this over to our guest scholar for the day. I want to talk with you just for a moment. I would like for you to go back and review the past sessions, particularly last week. We introduced a new topic called social determinants of health. And what we found is that the literature is clear that there are so many things that impact our mental well-being. For example, we were in San Diego just recently, and one of our medical providers did a research topic presentation on social determinants of health. And she argued as a medical doctor that finally your where you live, play, stay, and pray, all those places, they have an immediate impact on your well-being. For example, when a person is living in social determinants that impact their ability to have good food, listen, it is an impact on your mental well-being. If you're in a food desert, I speak to this all the time. Or maybe there's someone who actually is in a place to where you work and then you're in marginalized conditions. Listen, these things, think about a person who doesn't even make minimum wage. Their inability to have the basic human tenets that all of us have. I'm telling you that these are eye-opening situations that help bring attention to the fact that all of us deserve as human beings to have basic human tenets. We're going to get started today because we've been embarking on a new series entitled Mental Health, the Myth, the Medicine, and the Miracle. Because what we find is three areas we've been trying to hammer at. So many people, when they hear the term mental health, they go south and it's a very negative term. But the truth of the matter is, some of that's a myth. The truth is, and I'm unapologetic in saying, many of us have been misled by phobias that we have. For example, in the Black community, many people, I was just in a seminar just on this week, and the presenter talked about in the Black community, when you talk about mental illness, they argued that in their own family, they had a sick loved one. And guess what? They kept them upstairs. The community never even knew that the person was even living in the home. These are myths that we and taboos that we have to debunk because there is help. We lead into medicine. There are medicines that some people have to have. And I'm telling you right now, we talked to a therapist on our first session, Dr. McCrae, and she argued passionately that if you're on medicine, listen, be very clear that there's a purpose for the medicine. And some people need the medicine. We're talking straight talk on today. And then finally, it is the contentious area of the miracle, that there are so many people in the African American community, in particular, that are faith people. We are religious people, and sometimes we impose our religious convictions on other people. Thank God if you were able to get off mental health medications, but it does not mean that if a person is taking mental health medicine, it doesn't mean that they're faithless either. That's bad theology, and we're trying to debunk that as well, because so many people in the church, I talked to someone just this week, and they said that their loved one would get up in church and say, I want to go home. And the person said, listen, they were so embarrassed until they would stop coming to church. And then guess what happened? The person who became the caregiver for that mental person, they too began to find some degrading issues in their own faith, because they felt like the people in the church were giving them a hard time because they weren't coming to church. Listen, we've got a lot to cover, because the truth is, this is a big topic. But on today, we're talking about our youth and mental health. Our guest scholar today is no stranger to our youth and mental health. She's the best in the business when it comes to talking to our youth and their mental health. I'm going to digress today and bring in our scholar. I want to get your pens and your paper ready. Do me a favor, as she's giving her presentation, write down your questions. This is your chance to engage a licensed therapist on one-on-one. I'll put your questions on the screen, and she is in the saddle. The plane is on the runway, and we're ready to take off. Welcome, Sister Keisha Horton. Amen. We're too delighted to have you with us today. I'm telling you, I'm trying to keep my seatbelt on. But when I think about it, I've been in the school system for 9 years, and all of the mental health challenges that I recollect just in that statement alone, I'm too happy to welcome you to the stage. And at this time, we say welcome to the Real Talk Life's Issues Coaching Series, and our viewers, they're going to start shouting out to you here in just a second. You'll see them come across the screen. They know what we do to welcome our guests. So welcome, Sister Keisha. It's in your hands at this time.
Thank you, Dr. Williams, for that humbling introduction. Thank you so very much. Best in the business. I got some colleagues that might disagree with you, but I appreciate you.
Look, I got the mic, and I can say it just like I want to say it.
I appreciate that. I appreciate that. So, as Dr. Williams said, my name is Keisha Horton. I am a licensed therapist in the community, but more importantly, I think I get um, more excited about my full time, which is I'm a professional school counselor as well at the Parkland Magnet High School. I do have my own private practice, AmeriCares Counseling and Consulting. You can see my information on the bottom of the screen. And I've been in education and in the community serving students for over 15 years. So thank you again, Dr. Williams, for the introduction.
Absolutely, and it's in your hands at this time.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. If we could get my presentation up on the screen. Today, I've been asked to come talk about mental health in youth. I do consider myself an expert of the subject matter, not only because of my experience in the schools, but in the community. I've worked with several organizations where I get the opportunity to work with youth, and I consider it my specialty. Something special about that 15 to 25-year range when they're really trying to figure out life. But mental health starts a lot earlier than 15. So we'll run through today. We'll talk about what we're seeing in our youth today. What are some of the challenges, some of the actual symptoms and diagnoses that are going on commonly in our youth today, and some of the myths. I also want to talk about some coping strategies and how we as adults can support our youth. I think it's extremely important for us to realize not only is that the next generation, not only are they going to take care of us one day, but right now they need our help because they are definitely struggling, and some of them may not make it to adulthood if we don't intervene very quickly. So next slide, please. This is my information. My phone number is there, and so is my email address and all of my social media handles. Best way to reach me is either email or phone. Um, Again, I am a licensed clinical mental health counselor and a licensed clinical addiction specialist associate. The associate means that I haven't taken the test yet, but that is the goal by the end of the year, and I'll be fully licensed as an LCAS. And then, of course, there's my information for my private practice, SamariCares Counseling and Consulting, PLLC, and you can find me at samaricares.com. Next slide, please. So, what is normal? I get this question a lot. There's no such thing. At the end of the day, we are all very unique individuals, and so are our kids. We do I think our kids get caught up in being compared to each other a lot, and they're all dealing with their own struggles, their own situations, just as adults are. And I think it's unjustified to classify anyone as normal because who gets to judge that? I love that little quote, normal is just a setting on the washing machine, because we're all very unique and we have our own challenges, our own struggles, and our own cross to bear. So I like to deal with that myth first off. There is no such thing as normal. We all have something that we're struggling with and something that we are trying to overcome. And so are our kids. So the worst thing we could do is make them feel bad for being different or for being unique. Next slide, please. So these are just some of the facts. And I'm not going to read directly from the presentation, but 1 in 6 people with mental health conditions are age 10 to 19. That means it's very prevalent in our teenagers and in our youth. And it's starting before 10, but between that age range, 1 in 6 are dealing with some form of a mental health condition. And mental health conditions account for 16% of our global burden of disease. And those are just the ones that have been diagnosed. Unfortunately, there are a lot of biases that keep us from disclosing our symptoms and faking it till we make it kind of thing. But that is just being reported. Half of all mental health conditions start by the age of 14. Globally, depression is one of the leading causes, and suicide is the third leading cause of death in 16 and 19. There are actually some recent stats that's bringing it one is actually becoming more prevalent than third, is actually rising to the competing for the first place of leading cause death between 16 and 19. And of course, the consequences of not addressing these mental health conditions extend into adulthood. We cannot heal what we hide. That is the fact. So I encourage, if you are a parent or a grandparent or even an aunt or uncle, that you address, don't encourage our kids, don't model for our kids that it's okay to hide things. Unfortunately, if they're not addressed, they will follow them into adulthood. Next slide, please. So ACEs, if you've never heard of ACEs, I want to introduce that to you because it is a um, nationally recognized study that started in California, and the ACEs stands for Adverse Childhood Experiences. And there is just a chart right here on the right side of the screen that gives it three categories: abuse, neglect, and household dysfunction. If a student scores 4 or higher on this particular ACEs assessment, it is believed that they will have mental health conditions and they will have challenges into adulthood if they're not addressed. It's again potentially traumatic events that occur in childhood can include violence, abuse, and growing up in a family that has mental health or substance abuse problems. Toxic stress can change the brain development of a child. And that's where I really want to spend some time: the brain development of a child. Our young people are still going through a lot of growth in their brains. The frontal lobe development of a child, which is the decision making mechanism of our brain, does not come into full growth until their mid to late 20s. And there's a scientific fact that it takes a little longer for the guys than it do for the girls. So we are sometimes expecting things from young people that they just do not have the capacity to give or the capacity to do. They are still, their brains are still developing, they're still maturing, of course, but their brains are literally still developing. And the part of their brain that handles their decision making is still growing into their mid to late 20s, which is tied to a lot of the impulsivity that we see, a lot of the lack of self control, low self time management, things of that nature, because that part of the brain controls that mechanism. So, of course, at 15 to 16, it's further along than it was at 5 and 6, but it still has a long way to go. So sometimes we have unrealistic expectations for our kids, and we put a lot of expectations on them they don't have the capacity to give. But in their brain development years, if they have to go through any of these things that are listed on the screen, it delays their growth. It delays how their brain develops fully. And it could take longer to mid to late 20s for youth that are exposed to abuse, neglect, and household dysfunction. Next slide, please. So, what is mental health? I know that you all have had two speakers before me, and so I'm honored to be here. But I want to break down just a little bit of what mental health is, because it's not just the physiological side of things, it is the emotional side, the social well being, the physical. It all plays together, and it's important at every stage of life, all the way from childhood through adolescence and adulthood. A person's conditions with regard to their psychological, and emotional well-being is the definition of mental health. A person's condition with regard to their psychological and emotional well-being, a state of well-being in which an individual realizes his or her own abilities. So we are going through life, and again, no such thing as normal, but our mental health can determine how well we can cope with this thing called life, how well we can be productive adults or productive contributors to our community. Physical, spiritual, and emotional health are all connected, which is why it's important to focus on taking care of the whole person. A lot of people, unfortunately, spend a lot of time on our exterior. We want to make sure our hair is right, our nails right, our clothes are right, physically fit type deal, but we're not dealing with what's going on inside. Unfortunately, that is a contributing factor to your mental health. A positive state of mind and body, feeling safe and able to cope. That word safe is going to come up again, with a sense of connection with people, communities, and wider environment. That bottom line is we need each other. That's why when we went into isolation a few years ago, mental health spiked big time. There was a mental health crisis brewing right up under the pandemic. And that's what we were seeing in our kids when schools opened back up last fall. And I'll go into that a little bit later as well. But we need each other. Our community is important. They need to see us, and we need to see them. And when I say they, I'm talking about the youth. They need to see us. They need to see us managing life. They need to see us being role models. They need to see us, showing them how this thing called life works and how we can navigate and problem solve. We need community. We need to talk to them. We need to share with them. We need to encourage them. We need community, and they need us. They need each other. So much so, social media has grown into a billion-dollar industry because that's how they connect to each other. Not a healthy way, but that is how they connect to each other. Next slide, please. So this is just a list of our common mental health conditions that we're seeing in our youth today. Anxiety, or generalized anxiety disorder, is the number one mental health condition we're seeing in our youth. Excuse me. Mental health conditions are various, have various symptoms, but anxiety it can be looked at as just when you're consciously stressed all the time, when you cannot it's impacting the way you live, it's impacting the way you function. A child anxiety could keep them from being successful in class, especially if there's a lot of distractions around them, because it makes them anxious. Clinical depression disorder. A lot of times we cut this down to just depression, but it is the official title is clinical depression disorder. That's when a child or a youth adult cannot function and can't get out the bed, don't want to do things they used to enjoy, really, really struggling to engage in life and engage with people on a regular basis. Post traumatic stress disorder. The definition of PTSD in the DSM-5 right now is very limited. We hope that it will be a lot more extended when the DSM-6 comes out. But PTSD can be as simple as a microaggression, and it triggers, you're now triggered every time you are in that similar situation again, all the way up to sexual abuse or physical abuse. You can have PTSD. Racial trauma is a part of PTSD. I think we're all going through some PTSD from some of the things we've survived over the last few years in the midst of the pandemic. Bipolar disorder. This is usually not diagnosed in youth until older in life, 15, 16 and up, but you can see the symptoms before then. Panic disorder. That's pretty much when you're having anxiety attacks. You can't control yourself for about 5 to 10 minutes. They usually don't last longer than that. They usually peak within 10 minutes. But when you're having anxiety attacks with no triggers, with nothing contributing, that's a panic disorder. Social phobias. Sometimes kids don't like to be around a lot of people, or they can't, speak in front of people. It really debilitates them. They really get sick in social settings. Some people cannot deal with coming into a school building. Virtual academy kind of opened this virtual world we had to flip to in COVID, really opened up students to be more successful online. So there is a place for that, because their social phobias is a real thing. Attention deficit disorder, ADHD or ADD. Sure, everybody's heard of that by now. It became really, really popular in the late 90s, early 2000s, but it's been around for years. It is mislabeled a lot. So you have to be really trained to diagnose what I consider ADHD, but it is mislabeled a lot for some of the other conditions on the screen. Schizophrenia. Sadly, we are seeing more of this in our youth today. Sometimes the trait could be laying dormant in a youth system, and when they smoke a certain type of marijuana that is laced with something else, it can trigger that trait inside of them. Unfortunately, like I said, we're seeing an increase in kids being diagnosed with schizophrenia, and they're tying it back to their marijuana use. So this used to be an adult thing, but unfortunately, we're seeing it more in our youth. Obsessive compulsive disorder, or OCD, that just means you're very compulsive. You just can't control yourself and your attitude, your temper, your anger. Usually very defiant behavior is laying dormant, or not laying dormant, I'm sorry, showing itself in a child with OCD. Autism, very wide spectrum of autism. It is a form of social phobia, but just different in the symptoms, and it could be a very wide range. You can have what they consider Asperger's, which means you're on the higher end of autism, where you have a social some social issues, but you're not necessarily, it's not debilitating or controlling your life. And then eating disorders. I wish I could say we don't see a lot of this, but we do, especially in our young girls. They are comparing themselves to each other and to what society considers normal, and they are, bulimia and anorexia, purging and things like that have become more and more popular in our young girls. Don't see a lot of guys with eating disorders, but we definitely see a lot of girls with eating disorders. So these are just some of the common mental health conditions. This doesn't even touch the surface of everything that we see on a regular basis with youth, but these are the more common conditions that we're seeing in our youth today. Next slide, please. So, how does mental health look? Every kid, it can look different. So, these are just some of the common symptoms. You have to be a licensed therapist and/or psychiatrist to really assess and diagnose a client or student. We don't, just willy nilly put labels on kids just to have a label. We definitely want to make sure that you have a professional who is trained to assess the youth or even adult to determine what the symptoms are and what's truly going on. Like I said earlier, sometimes it could be misdiagnosed. ADHD is a very common misdiagnosis for trauma and things like that. So we definitely want to make sure you're dealing with a professional psychiatrist and or therapist who is specialized in a particular condition. So some of the mental health conditions are some of the symptoms you may see: excessive worrying, changes in appetite, changes in sleep, changes in motivation. I really, really pin this on to some of my teachers when we're talking about how to, you know, figure out if a student's just having a bad day or something else going on. If you see their change in motivation, if their grades start dropping, that is a clear sign that something is going on. If there's a bright kid and all of a sudden they just not turning in their work, they're not coming to school, their behavior seems odd, they're more on edge than usual, that is a huge sign in the school setting that I ask our teachers to look out for. Changes in energy levels. Like I said, if you have a kid who's always sleepy, always tired, you want to find out what could be going on there. Because that could definitely, you can definitely see that there's something going on. Feelings of self-consciousness and insecurities. We see a lot of this in our youth today, and I contribute that to social media. There's no other way around it. They are comparing other people's highlight reel, and that's really what it is. They're comparing other people's highlight reel to their full story that they live every day. And they don't realize that in a lot of times, other youth are dealing with the same things you're dealing with. They're just not posting it. So it's really, we're seeing an increase in these insecurities and these hopelessness and these incontentment. They're not content with their lives because they're constantly comparing themselves to other people. Persistent feelings of sadness and unworthiness, lost pleasure in activities. They used to love football, used to love soccer, used to love volleyball. Now all of a sudden they don't want to do nothing. That's definitely something going on. Struggling with concentration. That is a big one in the class setting. Now, every school in Winston-Salem is set up on a 90-minute period, 85 to 90 minutes per period. That's a long time for students to stay focused. So teachers have to be creative in keeping their attention. So we do have to determine if the student is bored or are they really struggling with their concentration, because 90 minutes is a long time to keep a young person's attention. But there is a way to determine the difference. And you really want to make sure that that student, before you try to, label them, is truly struggling with concentration and not just bored and not being challenged, which we see a lot. Muscle tension, shoulders, back are usually very popular. Legs, even for young men, you got a lot of muscle tension, muscle spasms. That our body keeps the score. If you've never read that book, I highly recommend it. The body keeps the score. That means when we don't deal with our symptoms, we don't deal with our issues, our frustrations, our body keeps that, and it's going to come out one way or another. Unfortunately, the older we get, we see serious conditions because we've holding all this stress in. But our youth, sometimes it's as simple as they're always having muscle spasms and leg cramps and things of that nature. But our body truly does keep the score. And then constant restlessness. Sometimes they're just so fidgety, can't be still, can't function, can't focus. That could also be what mental health. That could also be a flag that something's going on with their mental health. So these are just some of the common symptoms in youth specifically. They look a little different, and adults. Some of this, is a flag in adults, but some of it not so much. One thing that I did not put on this slide that I'm starting to see in youth a lot more is the anger and the frustration, and the lack of self control. We saw a lot of fighting in the school system last fall when schools opened back up to normal. A lot of fighting on both sides of town. It was everywhere. And that was just like students all of a sudden having this place where they can unload all of that stress and frustration that they was keeping for that year and a half that they were home. That life was weird because even when they came back to school in March or April of 2021, they were wearing masks and had to stay 6 feet apart and couldn't eat lunch in the cafeteria together. So it was still weird, and there was no not the social interaction they were used to. So when they opened the schools back up to normal last fall, we saw kids taking their trauma out on each other. And so, not saying that anger and frustration is not a biggie, but it's becoming more and more popular since COVID, for sure. Not saying kids wasn't fighting before. Next slide, please. And I kind of just alluded to this. 2020, 2021, and 21, 22 was traumatic for all of us. But what I don't think people realize is adults have the self efficiency skills. Most adults have the skill sets to manage their stress, to manage that trauma we were going through during COVID, to not allow it to change their lives and lose their mind. But children did not. They all of a sudden they was in school and all of a sudden they were not. Literally came to school on March 13th, which was a Friday, and literally the next day the governor shut schools down for 2 weeks, and it ended up being over a year before they were back in school normal. And they had to learn how to do school online, and they had to learn how to engage socially with each other through screens or things of that nature, and wear a mask. Like, that was very traumatic for all of us. But for our kids, they do not have the skills. They don't have the resiliency to manage what we just went through and what we're still going through. And there were layers of stuff on top of the pandemic. Unfortunately, the Black Lives Matter movement that sparked because of a knee on a neck. Like, we can't hide that. This did not just affect us, it affected our children. They saw a world that they hadn't seen before. Most adults knew that, some of this stuff was still out here, but they didn't. So that is a huge challenge that our students are facing today, learning how to manage their feelings about what we just went through in the last couple of years. Next slide. So healing is possible. Just as I said earlier, we can't heal what we hide. We have to deal with it. We have to have a way to manage our stress, the way to cope with these feelings that we're having. We have to validate each other's feelings. We can't ignore them, or they will show up in other ways. I do want to say that friendship, who we choose to be around, like I said earlier, is a huge part of the healing process. You have to know who you are connecting yourself with. I tell my youth a lot, it's a matter of life and death who you choose to be your friend. So that is a huge part of it. Choosing people that you want to be in your life that'll help you manage whatever you got going on. So some of our positive, healthy coping strategies, of course, therapy, talking to somebody. There's a lot of biases in our community about therapy, but these are trained individuals. I should say, are trained individuals that have gone through a lot of schooling, and we have to get so many professional development CEUs every 2 years to renew our license. We have to have certain areas of training based on, if we want to specialize in something. There is a lot of training and a lot of therapy for us. We have to go through therapy in most programs to make sure we don't have any dealt with biases and things that will come into the room with us. So therapy is important. It's not just going to talk to somebody, which you need to do, but it's more than that. So I highly recommend therapy for students who are really struggling with their symptoms and just need a safe space. That's what I call therapy. It is a safe space for you to unload everything that you've been holding in. Self-care, setting boundaries, is extremely important. Knowing when to say no and when to say yes, not allowing youth to overcommit themselves, which can happen. So setting boundaries, being mindful. Mindfulness has become a very popular practice amongst adults, but it's just as important for youth. Some of the ways mindfulness is practiced now is through yoga and exercise. A lot of things when the world shut down, a lot of people started walking and just getting out in nature. That is a form of mindfulness. Prayer is a form of mindfulness. Affirmations, that's become very popular, but speaking to yourself, encouraging yourself, posting notes around your house or having some messages in your phone. I even I've set up things in students' phones where every day it reminds them how awesome they are. You can set that up through your alarms in your phone. But affirmation, speaking to yourself, positive self-talk, limiting screen time. Youth don't like this one because social media, as I said earlier, is a real thing. But you feel so different when you take a break from social media, even if it's just for a few days. You can tell the difference in your functioning, and that's just not just for youth, but for all of us. Screen time not only includes your phone, but your iPad, your TV, anything with the blue light, because the blue lights are not great for our eyes. For one, but for two, it truly does affect our brain development. Creative expression. Some students like to dance. Some students like to play music. Some students, play sports or video games. Having some kind of something that brings you joy and peace, and having a way to express that creativity is a form of self care. So these are just some, but self care is huge. And I'm gonna show you a little bit more some self care and for you specifically in just a moment. But stress relief, physical activity, good sleeping habits, eating healthy, social activities, healthy social activities, and pets have all been proven to relieve stress. So much so it's becoming more and more popular for youth to request having a social anxiety dog or a therapy dog or fish or turtle. I've seen a little bit of it all that they want to take to college with them. And there is a process at most colleges for students to do so. So that pets is a huge one. We've always known that pets were a form of therapy, but it's becoming more and more popular in our youth today. And then, of course, spirituality, and last but not least, medication. I heard Dr. Williams touch on this earlier, and I know Dr. Um, Hope Counseling. I know she went into it a few weeks ago, but medication has a place. I know there's a lot of biases, a lot of preferences in families about taking medication, but I will say this: we will take medication if our bodies tell us to, if it's diabetes or high blood pressure. There's no shame in taking medication if you are mentally struggling. God has given us medical providers who have the skill sets and the testing and data to prove that some medications help with some symptoms. I do highly recommend it for students and youth that are struggling with certain symptoms that they cannot self-control. Of course, medication is not meant to be very long term, but it is meant to help us when we need it. Next slide. So, as I said earlier, self care. I'm a huge self care advocate. I think we will run ourselves raggedy by being everything for everybody. This is a hard slide to see on a presentation, but you can Google self care activities for teens. I'm sure it'll pop up. It's a very popular tool. I have pulled this out many times in my sessions with students, and I help them identify some realistic things. There's a lot of inexpensive or free things on here. Of course, going for a walk, listening to music, having a playlist that you know speaks to them. Or get your mind right is usually what I call it. Type playlist. Um, Music is huge for our youth, huge for our youth. But making sure that they know when to go to self-care, and it does take a village, guys. We have to be more conscious of our youth and how we're judging them, and how we are sometimes not modeling the best behaviors. We have to take care of ourselves. Excuse me, because they're watching. So self-care is extremely important for all of us. Again, this list is specific for youth, but there are many, many self care lists or self care tools on massage and exercise, taking day trips or girl trips or couple trips, getting out of the normal routine and just giving your brain and mind a break is extremely important. So self-care is huge for our youth as well. During COVID, I would encourage students, to go out for walks and not allow, even when parents are at work, not allow the walls to come in on them. That was hard. We were doing our sessions, virtually, and trying to encourage kids virtually was extremely important. So self-care became a big part of that. Work with kids virtually, helping them identify ways that they can, manage their emotions through self-care. So I want to bring that home. I know some people think, kids, they have all the fun in the world. They really, really don't. Their world is different than the one we lived. Um, and we have to validate that for them and be a safe space for them, uplift them, encourage them, motivate them. Adults play a huge part in their self-care and how we manage and manage our emotions and our biases and beliefs about teenage. We all were teenagers, and thankfully, um, when I was growing up, social media was not a thing. I could not imagine how my life may have been different if it was, but it has changed a generation. Reality TV has changed a generation. So we have to accept that and know that, yes, their behaviors may seem bad, but when there's some challenging behaviors, that is a flag that something deeper is going on. Next slide, please. I believe this is my last slide. Just some resources. We are lucky, we are blessed that the National Suicide Prevention Line recently, like a month ago, started the 811 line. So you don't have to remember 1-800-273-8255 anymore. That's the National Suicide Prevention Line. There is now a 811, a national 811. That was huge. So we got 911 for, of course, emergencies, physical emergencies. We now have 811 for mental health emergencies. And there are a lot of agencies tied to this 811 line, but there's always 24 hours someone there to talk to our youth at 811. There's also a Hope for North Carolina, specific for our state. Helpline is 1-855-587-3463. Those are the two main resources that we encourage and promote in the schools. There is a National Youth Crisis Hotline as well. Those three resources are the three we use to promote. But 811, again, just started last month. It is and then they have, from what I understand, it has definitely been already got some very proud data to show that it is working, it is helping our youth. So 811, and it's not just for youth, it is for all of us adults, anybody who is going through a mental health crisis. But 811 is a huge tool now. There's also a few websites there that I used for my presentation. You're more than happy to check those out. ACEs, you can Google and find resources on it. Again, it started in California, but it is a national exercise, a national study that we all that work with youth have to get training on to understand how those things impact our youth. And then, of course, my information is there, just as it was on the slide at the beginning of my presentation. Again, my name is Keisha Horton. I am a licensed professional school counselor, a licensed clinical addiction specialist associate, and a licensed clinical mental health counselor. I take pride in working with my kids. I allow them to be them. I meet them where they are. I don't try to force them into what we think that they should be, but I meet them where they are and go from there. It is my goal to help them be their best selves, their version of their best selves, not anybody else's version, but their version of their best selves, and to learn how to manage their emotions and their symptoms without shame. If we can remove the shame, we could really change a generation. Thank you so much. That concludes my presentation. And again, you can find me at samaritan.com.
Well, and well again. I'm just blown away with the intense amount of resources, information, and then passion. Because I'm telling you, in this work, Ms. Keisha, as you well know, the personal passion means everything. And so I want to maximize our time. We have had a ton of questions come in. I don't know how many we'll get. We have to end at 60 so that we can play this again on our websites. And so anything over 60 takes us out of that option. So I'm going to get started right away. I want to welcome so many more of you for your comments. If you've enjoyed this today, listen, even the presenters, we welcome affirmation. You heard her talk about self-care. And so if you've been blessed today, would you do me a kind favor? Put it in the chat. I'm of the persuasion that if it ain't said, it ain't so. And so if you want to have her know that she's been blessed, put it in the chat for us, and she'll be able to see that. Our IT team will make sure that that comes across the screen as well. I want to jump straight in. Good morning again, Miss Carolyn Jordan from Warrington. Certainly, Alexia Monet, excuse me if I mispronounced that. Reverend Celestine Williams, good morning. Miss Ethel Fredericks from Virginia. Thank you all for tuning in. As I always promise to try to give some shout outs to y'all. I want to use my time now to engage the audience with your questions. We've asked you to put those in. You can start sending those in now, and we will continue to put those on the screen. We have Ms. Horton. The first question that came up is they want to know if you can answer in your own short words, what causes mental health disorders? Is there anything particular that a person can look out for that says causes mental health disorders?
Unfortunately there are some that you're just kind of born with. They're generational, usually like ADHD. When my son was diagnosed with ADHD when he was young, when I was doing the research, this was before I was a therapist, I was like, oh yeah, that was me as a kid. Like, so some of it is just generational and passed down. Some of it are passed down in other ways. And I call them generational curses because there's no other way to put it. When we deal with trauma as a youth, if we don't get help for our trauma, we pass it right on to our kids, even when we don't mean to. We're not our best selves, and we pass that on to our kids, and we model it for them. Some things, like I said about schizophrenia earlier, we're born with traits that are in us dormant, and they can be triggered, especially with substance abuse use, not just marijuana. So there are many ways that mental health disorders are caused per se. But again, a lot of it is generational one way or another.
Very good. Thank you for that. Y'all be patient with me. I'm trying to get as many in as possible. The next question is, Ms. Horton, what are the symptoms of a mental health disorder?
Well, there are many symptoms, like I gave earlier. Some of it is, you know, you're depressed, you're very sad, you're having a hard time um, putting your feelings into words. You're just constantly feeling sad and hopeless. The definition, the defining thing for depression specifically is you're feeling sad, hopeless most of the time, every day. Like you're up to 2 weeks. Like you are literally feeling sad and hopeless 20 out of 24 hours a day, every day for up to 2 weeks. Like you just can't shake this sad and hopeless feeling, and then anxiety. You're nervous and worried about everything. Like everything pushes you over the edge. A student can't handle a B. That's some anxiety. There's some perfectionism there that causes anxiety. There are lots of symptoms of mental health. It just depends on the specific condition. But any change in behavior, any shift in behavior, like bipolar, if you're high and excited and on cloud 10 1 minute and low, depressed, not even wanting to be here anymore the next minute, that is a clear sign that you're having mood swings, which is a part of could be part of bipolar. So it just really depends on the condition. There are many, many symptoms, but anything that doesn't, you don't feel your best self, there, it's a sign that something is going on.
That is an excellent response. The third question, how can mental health struggles affect me physically?
Well, as I said earlier, the body keeps the score. So when you are under constant anxiety, when you're constantly stressed and traumatized, sometimes we have been under trauma so long we don't even realize it's trauma. It's our normal. It's become our normal, but we have an upset stomachs. I believe in women, and I'm not a doctor, but I do believe in women. A lot of times, it affects our our menstrual cycle. I'll just say that way. Fibroids is a very popular thing, and I believe that stress can come up in different ways. People having strokes and heart attacks young because you're just not taking care of your body, mind, or your soul.
Mm,
Um, mental health can affect you physically in many many ways. I had a friend a few years ago that literally fell out in his bathroom while he was brushing his teeth,
mm.
and they found out they called it a stress stroke. He could not speak, he could not move, he had to go through physical therapy. There was no sign of a stroke in his brain, but his body literally rejected, shut down because he was under so much stress. You just have to be careful.
That is such, and I appreciate you for making it real and practical that somebody can understand. Just something as simple as brushing your teeth, and then it have that level of effect on your physicality. Thank you for that. Listen, I hope you got your answer for that. The next question is, um, uh, Ms. Horton, how can mental health affect my sleep?
Well, if you are ruminating, you have what we call ruminating thoughts at night. Unfortunately, that's when it's usually the worst. And ruminating thoughts can be on anything at all, but you just cannot shut your brain down. You cannot, get the ample rest that you need to function. We need 6 to 8 or 8 to 10 if you're younger hours to literally function. Our organs need that rest time to function. So if you're not sleeping, if you're got so much on your mind, so much anxiety, so many ruminating thoughts that you cannot sleep, your body will unfortunately show you that. And one way it will show you that is mentally, you may not be able to function like having headaches. You are yarning and tired and sluggish all the time. Your body needs sleep, and when it does not get sleep, it will affect you mentally and physically. You have Sleep is important for us to function.
Wow. And I am a uh, clinical research engager with Alzheimer's, and it is clinically proven that sleep is a preventative measure for Alzheimer's as well. And so it is big. For those of you not getting enough sleep, I would just ask you to put this as an action item to build sleep into your regimen each day, because it really does make a difference. The next question, they keep coming in, Miss Horton. I'm trying to get them all
Oh,
in.
no
This
problem.
next question says, what kind of lifestyle changes can help with my symptoms of mental health disorder?
That's a great question. Lifestyle changes, just taking care of ourselves. Getting out in nature is important. I'm telling you, just walking, just sitting on your porch, um, getting not necessarily when we go to restaurants. If there's outside dining, go with. I know some of us don't like, especially when it's hot outside, don't like to be outside, but we need that vitamin C. We really do, and we need to smell the roses and hear the birds, and it is that by itself is a huge lifestyle change. Is getting outside and exercising, eating right, is important. Everything we put in our body is going to show back up, and sometimes it's mentally, um, because your brain doesn't have the food it needs, the nutrients that it needs to function. So some of the lifestyle changes that I always encourage is the sleeping, the eating, the getting outside and exercise, and then last but not least, the self care. Make sure you're having downtime. You're not working all the time. You're not cleaning the house all the time. That you're actually giving yourself some downtime to just be.
I want everybody to please, please, please be able to go back to our YouTube channel. Ms. Horton put up those very practical ways to do self care. Mr. Flanagan, I absolutely agree with you that he said number 20, writing in a journal. We know for sure that that is a proven methodology around self care. And so I'm just going to invite you to go back to this session, even after this is over. Try to find at least 2 or 3 of those self-care items that you can use to put in your toolbox, because we don't know what tomorrow may hold. I get it. I got a couple more questions. I have to do less
I'll say
narrating.
something real quick about the journaling.
Yes.
A lot of times I challenge my students and my clients to write in your journal, write to somebody. You
Mm,
know, like if you're holding in some animosity, some hurt, some pain, write that parent a letter, right? You don't have to ever give it to them, but just getting it out.
I know that's
Just
right.
getting it out.
Mm, that is powerful. Thank you, Miss Horton, for that. This is one I like. This viewer says, "What might progress with my mental health look like?" That's an excellent question, might I add.
It is. It is. Honestly, it's hard to describe. Like you just feel better. You
Mm-hmm,
feel lighter. You
mm-hmm,
know, you feel peace is priceless. Um, Peace is priceless. And like I said earlier, it's a matter of life and death when we choose to be our friends. So when you surround yourself with positive people, when you listen to positive things, you watch positive things, you feeding your spirit with good stuff, like you just feel better. Um,
mm-hmm.
you know if you decide to take medication, let's say you have been diagnosed with something like depression and you decide to take medicine, you will know rather quickly if that medicine is helping you feel better. You ultimately want to, one of my life quotes is, you want to live the life you love and love the life you live. And so when you don't feel like you're enjoying life, when you're constantly feeling heavy, burdened, you know, that is not a fun life, and life is too short. So you really do just feel better when you are dealing with your mental health. Ask anybody who's ever been to therapy. After 2 or 3 sessions, you just feel better because
I
you're
hear.
letting out all this stuff that you've been holding in.
Wow. I'm trying to get one more question in because I gotta stop at 60 minutes. Are there any topics on conversations I should avoid? Hmm. Are there any topics of conversation that I should avoid for my mental health?
That could be different for everybody. Like, I don't watch the news. It is not good for my mental health. You have to know your limits and what you can mentally manage, and how, when people talk about matching folks' energy, you can feel folks' energy, seriously.
Mhm.
Like, if you are around somebody and they are negative Nancy, they're
Mm.
always talking about, somebody or something negative going on. You have to set a boundary, and at the end of the day, there's no, you just have to be wise in who you surround yourself with. And like I said earlier, the things you watch, the things you listen to, you truly want to be a guardian of your mind and the things you put in it.
Let me give a quick shout out to Minister William Smith at Diggs Memorial, one of my former members. I so appreciate you. Listen, I if you can give us a 30-second answer, I'm gonna try to squeeze one more in.
Okay.
Um, are there any behaviors I can change to avoid causing future harm?
Oh, that's a deep one. Behaviors you can change: thinking before you speak. Thinking before you speak, giving yourself time to process things before you respond, I think is the biggest way we make or cause harm. We just say impulsively what we feel. Now, your feelings are valid. I hate when people tell you shouldn't feel that way, because your feelings are valid. And speaking in I feel statements is important. I feel instead of
Mhm,
you did is
mhm.
important. But honestly, the best behavior you can change, it's just thinking before you speak, giving yourself time to process it.
Mm. Um, and the last one is I think this can be a yes or no. I got about 60 seconds left.
Okay.
What should I do um, in a mental health disorder emergency? I think that's certainly a good place for us to end.
811. I said it.
811.
811. Dial 811. There are now mentally health trained police officers in most locations, most communities. There are mentally health trained police officers, but 811 is a safer place. They will find the resources in the community that are specifically for mental health, because sometimes police don't know how to handle mental health crisis. They
Yeah.
are not trained to handle. There are some now in some communities that are specifically trained in mental health, but call 811. That is the best place. And now that it's national, that is the best place to start when you are having a mental health crisis.
Okay, my time is up. I gotta end. Sister Keisha, thank you, times 1,000 to
Oh,
my viewers. I want to ask you one simple thing. Go back to our YouTube session. There were so many rich resources that Miss Horton has delivered unto us today. I do not have time to revisit them. I see many of your other questions. I'm going to ask, absolutely. Thank you, IT team. Here's her information, and I'm going to ask you to do me a kind favor. Go in, engage her. Here's her phone number, and here's her email address and her website, by the way, that you can contact her specifically. I got to pray lest I end this session wrong. So will you join me with a moment of prayer? Father, we thank you now for this day. Bless this session. We give you praise. It is in Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Thank you. And until next time, we'll see y'all again.
Thank you.